Is the human mind just a good story we tell each other? A useful fiction, but just like all other fictions, not real? In this episode, I will discuss the possibility of our mind being unreal. Basically, whatever we discuss in philosophy, there's always that group of philosophers saying, what you guys are talking about is wrong because it doesn't exist. If we talk about metaethics, there's Mackie claiming moral properties don't exist. If we discuss universals, there are nominalists like William of Ockham. And if we dive into the philosophy of mind, which is today's topic, we encounter the eliminativist Paul Churchland and Daniel Dennett, who is sometimes considered a fictionalist, although he resists this label. But we'll get to that later. Though eliminativism and fictionalism are similar, let's look at each separately. We'll start with eliminativism. To understand where Churchland is coming from, we need to ask, what does it even mean for something to exist at all? Consider atoms. Why do we believe in atoms? For years, even before the invention of the electron microscope, which provides images of atoms, scientists held that atoms best explained matter. The atomic model successfully predicts and explains various physical phenomena. So we have good reasons to believe atoms exist. Now let's contrast this with the phlogiston theory of combustion. This is J.J. Becher. He proposed that flammable materials contain something called phlogiston, which enables combustion. Wood burns well because it had a lot of phlogiston, while non-flammable materials like rocks basically don't have any. This theory initially seemed useful, right? It explains why some things burn and why others don't. However, scientists later noticed that materials actually gain weight when burned, which contradicts the idea of phlogiston being released. If something leaves the material, it should become lighter, right? Eventually, combustion was understood as a reaction between the material and oxygen, and phlogiston was recognized as non-existent. Churchland claims that it's a similar case with the human mind. Folk psychology assumes mental states like pain, love, hate, and that they exist, but they're actually like phlogiston, concepts based on entities that don't exist. To elaborate, take this sentence: a witch is living in the forest. Many people back in the day thought that witches existed in the same way that they thought that phlogiston existed. But the belief in witches was a terrible error that led to the murder of thousands of women. But the thing with this sentence is that it is always false because there is no such thing as witches. In technical terms, it quantifies over something non-existent. Now, consider this sentence. Wood consists in part of phlogiston. This sentence is also always false because phlogiston doesn't exist, even though people once thought it did. Churchland suggests that perhaps this sentence, "I'm in love with her," is also always false, because it references a property that doesn't exist. But isn't this unintuitive? If I'm in love, I can feel it. I know that feelings are real, even more so than I know that this book is real. Churchland's reasoning here is that folk psychology is a stagnant research program, lacking progress. Meanwhile, neuroscience has made major advances. So he argues we should drop terms like pain, love, and anger and instead talk about neurological signals. This eliminates the talk of minds, hence the name, eliminativism. Obviously, this wouldn't happen overnight, but it could gradually change over time. Now, an obvious problem here is that folk psychology is not a completely stagnant research program. It has made some progress. It's simply false that folk psychology is a dead end. Also, we have a scientific folk psychology, which derives much of its understanding from folk psychology. Claiming that scientific folk psychology is useless is likely wrong. And just imagine how awkward it would be to talk about neurological signals instead of something like love or pain. But perhaps the mind, while non-existent like phlogiston, is still just a useful fiction. Let's look at fictionalism. Daniel Dennett doesn't exactly label the mind as a useful fiction, but his views hint at a unique way of understanding it, which some interpret as fictionalist. According to Ian Ravenscroft, whose work inspired much of this episode, some of Dennett's ideas could be read as compatible with fictionalism. To understand Dennett's position, we need to look at his three stances: the physical stance, the design stance, and the intentional stance, which we can illustrate through a chess computer example. Suppose I'm playing chess against a computer. The physical stance analyzes behavior in terms of physical properties. Both I and the computer are physical entities made up of atoms, protons, electrons, and so on. Theoretically, we could predict our behaviors from this level, though this would be practically impossible for all but the simplest systems. The design stance considers an object's purpose. For instance, a piano is designed to produce sound when you press a key. If it malfunctions, I might go back to the physical stance to analyze the piano's physical parts and understand why it isn't working as designed. And the chess computer can be said to be designed to win chess games in the same way. The intentional stance, on the other hand, assumes that an entity, person or even machine, is rational and acts with intent. Imagine it's afternoon and Perry, who loves his afternoon coffee, is tired. We can reasonably predict Perry will make coffee because he's rational and likes coffee in the afternoon. Now, here's where Dennett's view becomes relevant. Even though Perry is a physical being, we usually find it impractical to analyze his behavior through purely physical properties. Instead, we find it natural to use simplified concepts like liking coffee or being tired to predict his actions. Dennett argues, if I have his position correct, that mental states like beliefs, desires, and intentions are real in a practical, explanatory sense. They help us to understand and predict behaviors. When we discuss advanced systems like the chess computer, the design stance might not even be sufficient to explain its behavior because it is so complex. Instead, we might say the computer wants to sacrifice its pawn, or the computer thinks this move is the best. But we know, of course, that the computer doesn't really want or think anything. It's just following complex algorithmic rules. But attributing these intentions is useful for us to make sense of the machine's behavior. Now, even though Dennett might not agree, to me it seems inevitable that we end up in fictionalism. Because if we attribute thoughts to complex systems, even though we know that they are not thinking, then why should we attribute thoughts to humans? But what do you guys think? Is the mind just a useful fiction? If not, then I suggest you to check out this video here about functionalism.